All right, I think in the essence of time, we'll get started there. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our first Chamber Masterclass with SEAMARK Asset Management. My name is Kayla Lynch, and I'm one of the event coordinators here at the Halifax Chamber of Commerce. I'm pleased to introduce our speaker. Don Wishart is the president of SEAMARK Asset Management, and he has spent 40 years in the world of finance. Don is joining us today to talk about how conventional group RRSPs create a paradox of choice. And during this masterclass, he will outline an alternative methodology to help you determine which RSP option is best for you and your business. And so I'm sure Don would love if you have any questions. So if you do, please feel free to drop your question in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and I'll be happy to ask them on your behalf after the presentation. So without further ado, Don, I will let you take the stage.
Okay, thank you, Kayla, and welcome everyone. As Kayla said, I would welcome questions, eager to take them. In fact, the presentation is only 15 slides long, so we'll probably take anywhere from 20 minutes to 25 minutes to do this. So if you're just doing it on your lunch hour, you'd have lots of time to ask any questions, and please feel free. So certainly in my career, we've seen a significant change with regard to pension arrangements, where when I first started, most pensions were defined benefit plans, and employees didn't have to worry about taking care of their investments because all they saw was what the benefit was going to be, and they knew if they just multiplied the benefit by their pay, they could see what they would get when they retired. But as the years went by, a real big switch occurred away from those and over to the combination of defined contribution plans and group RRSPs. So the difficult part of that is that it put the onus on the employee. And of course, as you know, most people are ill-equipped to know where to invest and how long to stay with whatever they choose in any event. So it really altered the risk and has made things difficult. The only difference really between a group RRSP and a defined contribution pension plan is that the defined contribution plan is a pension plan, and as such, it must be registered with the provincial regulatory authority, and therefore then there are annual reporting requirements, and there's a requirement that certain guidelines be met in terms of the administration of the plan. But group RRSPs are more left on their own, and as such, they appeal to employers who they want to provide something to the employee, but they don't want to get into having to do all of the filings and so forth. In fact, the word group RRSP is really used to define the fact that the employer is trying to treat his or her employees as a group. It isn't something that's defined in the income tax or anything like that. It's just a group of individual RRSPs, which are covered by the Income Tax Act. So basically, employees contribute through their pay. The employer doesn't have to contribute. In other words, you can set up pretty much what you want as long as the total amount that's contributed is no greater than what the Income Tax Act permits for any given year. So, for example, for 2020, I think it's a little over 27,000, but the maximum is 18% of your income. So as long as the combined contribution of the employee and the employer doesn't exceed that, any combination of how you get there can be done. Examples could be a percentage of pay, or it could be a dollar amount that matches whatever the dollar amount is that the employee puts in. It's wide open for doing that. And sometimes employers get involved in helping to determine where you'll select your investments. Other times they don't, and it can be left up to you. One important thing that has come up in the last few years is the whole concept of what do you do after retirement? In fact, this new word called decumulation has sprung up, and it really relates to the opposite of accumulation, I guess. The difficulty, whether it's a pension plan or it's a group RRSP, frankly, most employers want to stop having a responsibility for the employee after the retirement occurs for obvious reasons. And the problem with that is it can leave employees at greater risk, because once they retire, their needs can change. Obviously, they're taking money from their accumulated amount of money, and that alone can be stressful. But there are new risks. If you buy an annuity, then you've got low interest rates, so you don't get the same annuity you might have gotten in prior years. If you go with stocks, then of course you have to worry about what's going on in the stock market. There are all kinds of those challenges. And of course, with accumulating age, we're less and less inclined to want to have to deal with them. So this is kind of a toolkit that a person in that environment would have to deal with. A retirement income fund or a life income fund, every profession seems to have its acronyms, but that's what those two stand for. Basically, by the time you're 71, you've got to switch your RRSPs over to one of these, and it just sets in place a required amount that you must draw from the fund each year, again, under the Income Tax Act. You could purchase annuity. You combine this with any government pension you might have, and sometimes people defer those so that they can balance out their tax burden. And then, of course, there's always the issue that if you're coming from smaller companies in particular, you've got to mix all this in so you can buy the appropriate insurance. Whether you're retired or you're getting ready for retirement, there's usually a common suite of things that become available for investments. On the right-hand side are the ones that deal with not just picking any specific area such as Canadian equities, but in balanced. That word means that the fund that you're in contains stocks and bonds. And usually it includes stocks that are not just Canadian, but they're from the rest of the world as well. Target risk and target date are attempts, I think they originated at insurance companies, but I could be wrong on that. But in any event, the idea is that if you say, okay, today I'm 45, so I've got a target date 20 years in advance, you can set it up so that over those 20 years, the migration of how you're invested is changed, so that you take less and less risk as you get closer to the end. And then target risk is more you approach it from the risk angle instead of from the date angle. Each of those could be explored in greater detail, and I can try to help you if you had a question related there. The problem with all of this, as I was getting at earlier, is that basically there's a paradox of choice. Sure, we all make whatever choice we want for where we invest, and at first glance you could say, well, I'd love to have that. Particularly if you've seen in your own pension plan, if you're at a bigger employer, you see that you're not getting a good return, and you say, gee, I could do better on that myself. So certain people would love it. But what goes with that choice is the fact that most people are not well informed. They're not trained in doing investments. You know, just a sidebar for a second, in terms of to get to be a portfolio manager, basically you would have a university degree, and this is the most common route. You would then become an accountant. Then you would add in and that takes, I don't know, 3 years. Then you become a CFA, it's called a Chartered Financial Analyst. That takes about another 3 years, or it could. And then you usually have about 10 years of becoming an analyst before you become a portfolio manager. So, you know, there's a whole profession around the actual management of the money. And you can see why, if you just leave it to an individual to go through that role, what a disadvantage they have relative to the training that exists at the professional level. And then there are lots of other reasons why these can go wrong. I won't just recite them, but it's obvious that, you know, anything could happen in the market. So you could have an event could occur that throws off all the plans you have. People are enticed to take their money. Even, you know, the government has a couple of plans set up for purchasing your first home, for example, which gives rise to taking money out of RRSPs. So lots can cause it to go wrong, and lots does cause it to go wrong. What I would suggest to you as the answer to this is, and I think what I'm about to describe is a bit of an extension of these target risk or target date alternatives. And that is that you turn over the responsibility of working for your individual RRSP to a person who is capable, or a firm that is the portfolio manager for the employee. Now, historically, that hasn't really been possible, mainly because technology didn't facilitate it. I mean, we just didn't have the computing capacity to bring the costs down. And as a result, the fees would have been higher to have enabled this to occur. But lots has changed, and some new design work has gone on, so it can be done. An example of how it would work is, think of this all being done over the internet. And what would happen is you would get yourself a secure ID and password, log into whatever software was being utilized, complete what's called a Know Your Client form, KYC, and answer a questionnaire that really relates to your risk tolerance. So you would define your net worth, how you would react if the market went up or down, things of that nature, to kind of get to a point of figuring out the layer of risk that you could tolerate. It has some logic built into it that I use the expression here that's like a traffic light. If you don't meet the requirements, you can't go farther. You must answer all of the questions, for example, so that the portfolio manager can get a good sense of what's appropriate for you. And if there are inconsistencies in the way that you answer, then what happens is a report would kick out to the portfolio manager, and they would then email or call you based on the information you'd put into the system to discuss it with you, rather than just take these at odds answers and try to construct something. So there's a scoring logic. It's all tied to how old you are, as I said, the risk tolerance, your financial circumstances. And in the end, what happens is the portfolio management person provides you with what we would call here at SEAMARK the best fit of various funds. And what I mean by that is investment funds, like say a Canadian equity fund, a US equity fund, maybe a lower risk fund for equities that's just focused on dividends, bond funds, and so on. Just like we had in that earlier slide where I showed you a variety of different investment categories, you could still use those, except this time the portfolio manager is doing it for you. You don't have to do it yourself. So as usual, at the end of a pay period, some money gets switched over to the portfolio manager firm, or otherwise called administrator. They place the money that comes into the funds that you had signed off on when you accepted the recommendation that came out of the earlier slide I just spoke to. Various reporting elements would exist, so you could see what had been purchased, what the value is at any given time. You would just log into the software that had been provided to see your individual account. And most of these funds are what we call mark-to-market daily. In other words, around when the market closes at 5 o'clock Atlantic time each day, accountants behind the scenes take the values for each of these stocks that are in the funds, they multiply them all out to get the value of the overall portfolio. And then that's divided by the number of units that people own. And it says this is the value of any given unit. So if you knew that you own 2,000 units, you'd know what the value was at the end of that day, and you could just look it up on the system. So just like if you had owned stocks directly, really. Most of these systems would require that at least once a year you update your information. And in fact, if you get to the end of a year and you haven't updated your information, the software will cause you to have to do it before you can see more information. It's just to make sure that the way in which the portfolio is being managed does not deviate from your circumstances. Anything could have happened in the meantime. So it's always good to make sure there are updates. And in addition to the regular monthly reports, you get more detailed reports at different intervals, including quarterly and annually. The reason that we were interested in making the presentation is that we did work with a vendor to design this software, and we make it available for the funds that we manage at SEAMARK. This firm has been around since 1982, and it's for many years managed pension money for very large funds. And only in the last several years have we opened up to assist individual clients and group RRSPs, or basically smaller accounts. As I said earlier, it's the technology that has enabled us to do it. We were always eager to be of help, but we didn't have the technology previously. Now that we have it, we'd like to help people that are, particularly in Atlantic Canada, to make the best for their retirement solution. And we think as portfolio managers, we will optimize the investment result in addition to providing these administrative tools. So we're eager to talk to people about that, and that's what motivates us to, through the chamber, make a presentation like this. And with that, I'll just say that I'll provide to Kayla a copy of this if you'd like to get one, or you could just contact us directly. And at that, I'll just say I'm eager to take any questions that you may have. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks, Don. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box there, but I do encourage anyone who's tuning in there, if you do have any questions for Don, definitely put them in the Q&A box. What investment trends are you seeing right now, kind of in a COVID world? How has kind of the market changed, and what are people investing in now with their portfolios?
I think it's not so much a function of COVID particularly, but a function of lower interest rates. Even retired people are less likely to use bonds than they would have done in the past. So there's a substitution for, just think of it this way, a Government of Canada bond only provides an interest rate of about 0.6%. So you're not going to make much money on that. And people are searching to improve that. We call that the yield. People are searching to improve the yield. And there's been a orientation toward dividend paying stocks as a substitute. So our low volatility fund, for example, provides a yield of over 4%. So that's just the amount of the dividend divided by the value of the stocks is how you calculate that. And the offsetting risk to that is it is still stocks. So there's more risk than there would be if it's something like a GIC or bonds. However, people have to live, and some component of that might be useful for what I call those decumulation funds, for example. So that's really where there's a swing. It's more, even though there's the greater risk in equities, Kayla, there's been more of a swing for these various retirement arrangements. Even the target funds that I spoke to are less likely to have a big component in bonds compared to the past.
Interesting. Very cool. So I know obviously like with COVID, back in March, the market really dipped quite a bit, and I'm sure a lot of people were calling you in a panic. Have you seen kind of the market resurge a little bit, or are we still kind of in that downward spiral? Or are we moving back up, or what's the state of the market?
If you just think of it as just a stock market, stocks across the board have moved back up anywhere from 65 to 85% of what the value had been just prior to the decline, except for technology stocks, which have just really skyrocketed. And in fact, even the technology stocks, it's mostly just the top 5. There's an index in the US called the Standard & Poor's 500. And so there are 500 stocks in that. If you took 495 of them, the index has only gone up on a very gradual curve. If you add in the other 5, it's skyrocketed. So that has made, for example, Apple is worth over $2 trillion as one stock. That one company is worth almost 60% of all the stocks on the Canadian Stock Exchange. So phenomenal. And people would say, well, gee, why wouldn't you just go into that then? But these entities don't pay dividends for the most part, or if they do, they're very tiny. And the value of them we believe, is not worth what people are willing to pay for them right now. So there's a fear that they could fall back. And in the last several days they did. They're down like at least 12%. So it can happen in a hurry. I think of it as musical chairs. Once everybody wants to own something, you know, if the taxi driver tells you what stock to buy, make sure you sell it, don't buy it. But once people are doing that, it becomes a game of musical chairs of who can get out first. And that can be scary. For most funds, they've got most of the money back. And I think once we have the vaccines, they'll get the rest back. And they just need to exercise patience. In the meantime, the majority of these big companies have not cut their dividends. There have been a few of the smaller ones, but not very many. And we're very fortunate in that those various government programs have really helped in that regard.
Interesting. Awesome. You're a wealth of knowledge, Don, I must say. So you must just be dazzling everybody with your knowledge here. I don't see any questions coming in. So I guess we'll wrap it up there. So thank you to those of you who did join us today. I'm sure we learned lots and we've got lots to think about. So thank you, Don, for informing us about the optimal form for group RRSPs. And as Don mentioned as well too, he'll share with me this slide deck, and I'll follow up with everybody with the slide deck as well as Don's information as well too. If there's anything that you think of afterwards and you want to ask Don a question, I'm sure he'd love to hear from you. So thank you all again. We hope that you've been enjoying our virtual events. We have a few more that we'll be announcing soon as well. So you can always check out our full lineup at www.halifaxchamber.com/events. So thank you again so much, Don, for your time today, and thank you everyone, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, Kayla. Take care.